Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we get started on today's video, I just want to take a moment and send some love out to those of you who have been affected by the LA fires. I know there are so many people who have lost not just their homes, but loved ones as well, and I want you to know that my heart goes out to you. As a resident of a country that is frequently on fire, I totally understand the devastation that these types of fires can cause. So if you're in the LA area or you have friends and family in the LA area, know that I'm thinking about you, and I encourage anyone who has the means to donate to their local Red Cross. And I say that because I know what a difference it makes. We have in the last 10 years lost 2 entire cities here in Alberta, and without the help of the Red Cross, I can't imagine where those people would be. Okay, moving on to today's video. This is actually part 1 of 2 of the Friend's apartment, and in these next 2 videos we're going to be focused in the kitchen. I want to complete all of the cupboards and cabinets as well as the appliances for the kitchen. So I hope you'll stick around, and I hope you enjoy the videos. I'm going to work in the kitchen in this video. So what I've done is I've cut out from some graph paper all of the different items that need to go into the kitchen. So we have an island, the stove, and then 2 countertops at an angle, and then finally the fridge. Now I know in the original apartment that there was enough room there for a little table where a microwave sat. I did not leave myself enough room to do that, so I'm going to have to leave that out. I already know how high those pieces can be because I did all that measuring when I put the wall tile in. So everything is going to sit in this area here. For the most part, the furniture pieces are going to be made out of this 1/16 of an inch in width plywood. It is the thinnest wood that I have that's sturdy enough to make furniture out of. And I thought it might be a good opportunity to use up some of these scraps from some old projects. I didn't find a ton that was usable because most of it is too small, but I did find this piece, which I think will be really nice for the countertop. For those of you who aren't maybe necessarily in the know for what the apartment looked like, this is the reference picture that I'm using for the kitchen area. It won't be exact and it won't be perfect, but I'm going to try and get as close as I can. I'm going to start with the stove. So I've cut out all of my pieces, and I'm basically going to make a wooden box. I'll start by gluing the 2 sides to the back piece. Now the back piece is a little bit longer than the sides because of course all stoves have that section at the back of the stove where you would have your clock. Sometimes you would have your controls or your oven temperature, that sort of thing. So I'm making sure that when I'm gluing the sides that they are nice and flush with the bottom of the back piece. I picked up this little silicone glue applicator from Temu. I think it cost me about $5. For those of you who have followed along, you know I have this love-hate relationship with glue. So I'm hoping that this little tool will help make gluing a little bit easier. I'll put the front of the stove on next. And I should say that all of the doors and drawers in this kitchen will be non-functioning. So you won't be able to open the oven door or the cupboard doors. I find that working in half scale or 1/24 scale is already very difficult for me. It's not the scale that I normally work in. And so the idea of trying to make these doors and drawers functioning is just a little bit farther than I think I want to go with this project. My daughter isn't going to be opening doors and drawers and trying to play with it. This really is more for her to look at than for her to actually, you know, interact with or play with. I mean, she's 30 years old, so she doesn't need to see what's in the cupboards. And now we can go ahead and add the stove top. So the stove is actually going to be stainless steel, but in the front where you can see the separation of the different parts of the oven door and the window into the oven, everything looks black. So instead of trying to put the silver on and then add the black after. I'm going to kind of do it in reverse. So I'm going to paint the whole front of the oven door, and then I'm going to piece on the pieces of vinyl to make the stainless steel. So I've cut out and attached two pieces so far. One is the drawer that's typically in the bottom of an oven, and then the other piece is the oven door itself, and I just cut that rectangular space out for the window. I still have a couple pieces I need to attach. So this one is going to sit where the controls are, just above the oven door, and it's going to go all the way back across the top of the oven as well. So you can see here where I'm leaving that little tiny line of black in between just to separate those pieces. I'm making sure to keep that piece nice and smooth on the top and then up over top of that extended piece on the back. And now that I have that all pressed down nice and flat, I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to trim off all of the excess. To make the dials for the front of the stove, I'm digging into my stash of these little gems that you use for diamond art. I had picked up a couple of really cheap diamond art kits from a dollar store and got lots of different colors for my stash. They turned out to be the perfect size for what I needed. To make the burners for the top of the stove, I'm just using some really thick black cardstock. I drew out what I think looks like burners for a gas stove, and now I'm just going to cut them out. Now all I have to do is glue them down in place. I finished it off by putting some vinyl on the left side of the stove. I didn't do the right side because you won't see that. I also added a handle for the oven door and this tiny little decal for the brand name of the stove. I'm moving on now to the first counter and set of cupboards that will sit just to the right of the stove. Now the countertop itself is cut on an angle on one side, so the pieces are cut at different lengths to accommodate the difference between the back of the cupboard and the front of the cupboard. They are, however, all the same height. I'm going to first glue the side pieces onto the front of the cupboard. And each of those side pieces are going to sit on the very edge of the front piece. And now I'll add the fourth side, which is the back of the cupboard. Now the back side is going to sit flush on the left-hand side with the larger extended piece coming out to the right. I've put that first set of counters to the side. I'll glue the countertop onto it after I've had a chance to paint it. So I'm moving on now into the second section. So this is the section that sits underneath the window. And for this section, I really have to use the countertop as a guide for where to build the cupboard. It's just too odd of a size and shape to be able to do it without the countertop as a guide. I've cut out the space for the sink, and now I'm going to start building the cupboard. So this section here had a cupboard that you could actually see. This section under here you couldn't see because it was under the counter. So I've turned it over so that I can glue my cupboard onto the top, which is actually the bottom of the counter. And I'm just going to go ahead now and add my sides. So this first side, you're not going to see this because it'll be inside the cupboard. So I'm just going to put it in straight and line it up kind of with the side of where the sink will be. Now my second side is going to be right on the edge of that counter space. And I know it looks like I'm not going all the way to the top, and I'm not, but that's because the front of the cupboard is going to be set back just a little bit from the countertop. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Now the front of the cupboard wasn't actually a cupboard door, it was just an open space, and in behind that space was a curtain. So I want to cut out the space first before I add the front piece to the countertop. I'm sanding off some of these rougher edges as well. This is part of the cabinet that you will see, so I want it to have a nice smooth finish. Next, I'm going to attach that front piece onto the cabinet itself. And now, just like I had just mentioned, you can see how the counter hangs out over the cupboard portion. So I've cut out some very thin pieces of wood, and I'm going to make the cupboard doors now. Now, like I had said, these are not going to be doors that open. These are going to be false fronts. And so it's just a matter of attaching those pieces onto the cupboard itself. First, though, I want to add some trim around the cupboard doors. So this trim had mitered corners, and rather than trying to use a piece of wood, which I think will just be out of scale and too thick, I'm just using some thick cardstock. So I've cut off about a 2.5, maybe 3 millimeter strip, and I'm just going to go around and just frame out both of the cupboard doors. I'm going to paint all of these pieces before I add the countertop on top of the cupboards. So for the countertop itself, in the apartment, it was this very nice light brown butcher block kind of a countertop. And so I found a nice honey brown. I've added a little bit of water so that it acts more as a stain than a paint. So I'm going to paint both countertops, this one that I'm working on now, and then of course the one that has the cutout for the sink. Then wipe away some of that excess moisture with a paper towel. I just have to have a steadier hand with this one, seeing how it's already attached to the cupboard. The rest of the cupboards were blue, so we'll paint that next. Now you can see here that above the cupboard doors, I've also added some false drawer fronts as well. I gave the cupboard 2 coats of blue, and now I can go ahead and glue on the countertop. I need to make sure that the countertop is flush with the back of the unit and then also flush with the side. The last piece that I'm going to make is the little island that separated the kitchen from the entryway. So this little island was really more of a shelf with a countertop on top of it. So these pieces near the bottom of the screen are actually the 2 sides of this shelving unit. And you can see here that I've drawn some lines. All I wanted to do was to measure to make sure that my shelves are going to be level and straight when I put them on. So there's actually 3 lines drawn on these pieces, and it's hard to tell that because the first one is so close to the bottom. So I'm going to glue all 3 of the shelf pieces onto one side first, and then we'll add the second side on after. So I've put the second side on and I've completed the shelf section, and now all I have to do is to add the countertop. I've rounded off the 2 corners that are not against the wall. Now this counter was actually a little bit wider than the shelves itself, so I want to make sure that the overhang section goes towards the doorway or the entryway and not over top of the stove burners on the other side. So it's important that it be flush on the one side. This shelf island unit was the same color blue as the cupboard, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a coat of paint. So again, I had to add 2 coats of paint to get full coverage, but I think it turned out really well. So here's where we're at so far. You can see here that I've added some handles onto the cupboard doors. I just used some very tiny little seed beads, which were the perfect scale for those little handles. My plan for the next video is to make the fridge and to somehow figure out how to make that little sink. Until then, thanks for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.